Is that a soundbite we send?
Yeah. Let's blast that one out tomorrow.
That's what your friend and your lawyer said.
That's what your friend says. Dugan, it's great to have you here today on the show. Super excited, to have you here today and talk to you about the most exciting thing in syndication, which is, legal. It's just so exciting.
I can tell. The energy is high in the room, fellas. The energy is really high. I can tell you love this.
But I think it's important, right? I mean, obviously it's important. Every deal has to have a great attorney and someone to work with. And so we've worked together on several deals. Yep. And so we wanted to bring you in and just talk about the exciting times that we are in multifamily that we're in. And but before we get into that, I really want to talk about who you are and where you come from and why the heck did you choose to be an attorney? Because not many good people in this world are attorneys these days. So.
Yeah, that's what they tell me. Right? So I'll give you the elevator speech of what who I am and how I became an attorney. I was born and raised in a small town. Well, it was the capital city of Montana, but small town by Texas standards, by any standards. Imagine.
How many stoplights?
There were a lot of stoplights in that
it's
town.
not that small.
Now, I grew up in a very small town called Lakeside, Montana, and that had one stoplight, and it was flashing all the time. So,
nice.
But my dad was a lawyer and a pastor, and so I'm a pastor's kid.
I am too.
Okay, love it.
So you're really screwed up.
Yeah,
so.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder to see what sin I'm going to be saddled with.
Preachers' kids are the wildest ones, I guess.
They most definitely can be. I think I had an old soul for most of my life, but my dad was he's a very driven, passionate person, and when I was young, was going to a school, and he really wanted to see how far I could excel. So it's kind of like, how fast can you run? Let's see. Let's come on. And so I finished high school at a very young age, went to college and got out of that with a bachelor's and a couple degrees at like 19, and then graduated from law school at 21. So I was still really I don't want to say a child, but I was my brain was still maturing even in your late teens and your early 20s. And so I didn't really have I want to be a lawyer. I grew up watching TV, loved movies, always saw the guy get the guy off on the stand, the Perry Mason moment of cross-examining them. And I thought that's what I wanted to do. And so, but my dad was very, very formative in doing and pushing me and driving, and so I'm a big believer in parents that have a strong hand in their child's life. Don't ever sit on the sidelines and say, well, that's their life. I'm not going to give you my opinion about that. My family certainly isn't like that. It's like the Shark Tank. Everybody has an opinion about everything, and everybody is in everybody's business about everything. That's how my family is. But through that process, through my teenage years, my dad encouraged me to get my real estate license, so I took and passed the real estate bar in Montana around 17. I had to wait till I was 18 just to get it because they wouldn't give it to you for less than that. And so I've always kind of done things at an accelerated pace, but it's largely because of the parents the Lord gave me. I mean, there's nothing terribly special about me or whatever. I was just driven, and my parents were like, come on, go do it.
Well, I've been watching Suits for a few weeks.
Yes.
I'm a little ways in, so I feel like I've got a pretty good. We're probably
okay.
You might know a little more than me right now.
So I'm like Harvey.
Yeah.
So okay. I did a lot when I first started practicing law and corporate law. That's what I did a lot of what he did. Yeah. So I did on the litigation, things falling apart, putting it back together, doing deals, make sure that things can actually close or resolve that. But the syndication space or the upfront side always intrigued me because I was always at the back end with the pooper scooper, waiting to help people either in the boardroom or arbitration or trial. And so I had a good friend who's a syndicator, who we all know, right? He encouraged me. He encouraged me, and some other clients that were syndicators encouraged me to say, why don't you start doing this on the front side? You're always over here on the back side, working on the litigation side of things and enforcement and all of that. Why don't you start doing it over here, because people are a lot happier? And it clicked. And so I started doing that, and thankfully the Lord opened up opportunities for me to do that. And I think we're one of the country's largest syndication law firms, if I think about by deals and the amount of volume and all of that we've done. So that, I don't want to take credit for that. I think that's totally the Lord and just a blessing that He's given to us. But that's how I got involved in the syndication space, is really by kind of stumbled into it, and I had some clients that were like, hey, come on, let's go do this.
Yeah, so question I have is, right now I think there's a lot of turmoil in the industry and issues and things out there that people are worried about. So what are the issues you're seeing right now that everybody's dealing with, and what can be done?
Oh man, well there's everything from I've never seen the Securities and Exchange Commission this active in my 23 years of the practice of law. They are extremely active in enforcement, and they should be, because there are some syndications and some deals that have just been totally horrible, like to the point of fraud. Like somebody syndicated something, took a bunch of money, and it doesn't work, and it's never going to work because it doesn't exist. That type of thing. And so we're dealing with helping investors who have lost money, and they're victims of these types of things. So we're helping assist the Securities and Exchange Commission and the FBI or other law enforcement officials in connection with enforcement actions associated with that. And then you've got things where there's no fraud or other types are involved, but the deals are struggling. And why are they struggling? Well, we've seen the Fed increase rates at an exponential rate. I have never seen this fast, this many rate increases, and it's all in an effort to obviously stem inflation, which is driving down. I think I saw or read in the journal it's at 3.2% right now, right across the country is inflation. Still not great,
right.
Meaning they want to get it down to 2%. But what that does is, for a lot of syndicators who they go in on a bridge loan for their acquisition on a floating rate bridge loan, and they see maybe a dip in occupancy, maybe no fault of their own or their property manager or whatever, they see a dip. That means that the floating rate, if they don't have a rate cap, and even with those that have rate caps, maybe the cash influx is not sufficient to cover debt service. So what that leaves is a short funding problem, right? So now you've got loans for a short period of time where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't pound out the light bill on a monthly basis. Who's going to help me pound out the light bill and the debt service and all of these things? And it's requiring the sponsors, operators, syndicators to dig deep into their pockets. Many of them, good, honest, hardworking individuals, don't have the cash reserves to be able to float that property. So even if they have the best of intentions, you're seeing deals across the country kind of wobble a little bit.
Yeah.
And so that's leading to a lot of uncertainty and pressure for operators to make decisions quickly, efficiently, and to either sell the asset or to refinance the asset. And as you're trying to go to the market and refinance an asset that's maybe potentially underwater, so now you bought it at a 2 cap and you're refinancing it at a 5 cap. So for those of you that are listening, you don't know what that means. That means that the price of the property that you paid for, it's not worth it anymore, right? So now you're trying to recoup that value, pay off the loan, satisfy and protect your investors, and there's a friction that exists in that tension. And I can just tell you, having lived and practiced through the last recession in 2008, and this is not 2008, so I don't want people to say, Dugan said this is 2008. It's not. It's not the same, not seeing the same problems or whatever. But in that recession, lenders took their pound of flesh. They always will get their pound of flesh. Yep. So if you think that you're going to be able to hold off Mr. Freddie Mac, Miss Fannie Mae, Mr. HUD, or the bridge lenders, the innumerable bridge lenders out there, you will not. They have the leverage. The law is on their side. The regulatory scheme is set up to benefit them, as it probably should, because they are your biggest investor. Yes. So they will get their money out of that. But operators need to move, and they need to move quickly.
Well, how much do you think this is fear, and how much of it is reality? Because if you look at the history of the rates, we are still at a, even at a 6% rate, we're at a much lower rate than over. I mean, in 1989 it was what, like 9%, and in the 90s it went up into 16% at the highest, and then slowly started creeping down. So I mean, historically we're still at a very low average. But how much is it fear and how much is it reality?
Well, I think it's a toxic stew of a lot of political noise. So it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. These are apolitical. Investing should be for everybody, right? But there's a toxic stew of trying to work the market, and it has ripple effects in your debt and your underwriting and your budgeting, and all of that goes into the success or failure or struggle of a particular property or set of properties that you might put under contract. And so it's on the one hand it's political, on the other it's the market's being tweaked, and then on the other there are unrealistic fears because of people that have lived through the recession in 2008, and they're starting to light their hair on fire and thinking this is Armageddon. Yeah. And that's the fear that you're talking about. That is unrealistic. I don't want people to base their decisions in fear. Right. Fear is not a good emotion to make intelligent decisions for you, for your family, for your investors, or ultimately even for the lender. The lenders are not panicking, by the way. There's not a rash of foreclosures that we're seeing across the country. In fact, in June, just this year, 2023, or early July, the Fed, the FDIC, the Treasury Department regulators came out with joint guidance telling lenders, work prudently and constructively with your borrowers, and if they're otherwise a credit-worthy borrower, the lenders should modify and or restructure the loan in order to survive this. So it's almost like guidance like, hey, pretend. I want you to pretend for the next 12 to 18 months that this loan is performing. And so for a lot of banks, a lot of people don't understand this, that they think that it's like Scrooge McDuck, right? That there's gold in the vault and you'll be able to go see it. No, your money is not at the bank. That physical place that you go to, your money's not there. Your money has been loaned out by that same bank potentially to a bunch of other borrowers, or your loan has been shopped out and sold or to other investors out there. And so they're not making decisions that are based in fear. And I don't see a rash of that. In fact, if you look at what most economists are saying right now, is that this is going to be a relatively soft landing. Does that mean that there's not going to be foreclosures? Probably not. There will be some foreclosures. We saw that boob in Houston, what he did, right? How he just basically put his head in the sand theoretically and just didn't, in my opinion, didn't do what he should have done, and that led to obviously complete and utter collapse of some investor money out there.
So I have lots of customers all over, but I hear stories, right?
Right.
I hear stories of people, and one of the stories that I've heard recently is that good syndicator owned multiple properties and just trying to make it through this time, right? And so did something not ethical, right? And so he took from one property, paid another one just to keep everything afloat because he had already taken all of his personal money and thrown it in all these properties he owned to save it. And now he's lost everything because of this. And so you're seeing some of these things kind of take place when we try to do everything we can to save what we're doing, save our investments and save things like that. But, taking from this property to this property, we all know it's illegal to do, but just trying to save things and keep things moving forward. And then you have other ones that are, really digging deep in their pockets, just trying to keep it afloat until things turn around. So, there's a lot. We all hear about the bad, but there's still a lot of really good operators out there in this industry doing a lot of good things. There's a lot of good properties still out there running. We talked about before we got on. There's a vast majority that are still performing and doing well.
Absolutely.
It's just a small piece that we hear about and that everybody's talking about in this industry.
What puts the stain on the industry and what makes potential investors think potentially the industry's a Ponzi scheme and all of that.
Yeah, it's not. So, I mean, you can just take a snapshot the last 20 years, look at the S&P 500, look at the Russell 2K index for small business growth and stocks and other equities, and then look at the real estate market. Yeah. The real estate market has outperformed all of those metrics, the public market. So and what we call the alternative space, because that's what real estate investing is, right? It's not a public market for real estate unless you're going to be a REIT investor, which most retail investors in the syndication space are not REIT investors. But it has outperformed. So it objectively, by any criteria, investing in real estate is still one of the safest things to do. I do agree, Dan, wholeheartedly that there is not enough positive press by syndicators, operators, sponsors, I use those terms interchangeably with one another, by them saying, hey, the overwhelmingly majority of my portfolio is performing. Yes, admitting transparently, authentically with your investors and or your lender that where you struggle. But we constantly talk about the bad things. Mm-hmm. We never, I shouldn't say never, my wife, so I'm going to slip into my wife here for a second here. The comment is that you very rarely see somebody say, hey, look, I have 10 properties. 2 are struggling, 8 are not. We never talk about the 8. We only talk about the 2. And you cannot discount the gains that investors have made in the last decade. So from 2012 to 2022. I mean, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? They've made massive amounts of money and returns and everything. I mean, we're living right now. This is the single greatest transition of wealth from generation to generation is occurring right now. So anybody that says that there's not opportunity out there, and I have clients that they sit on the sidelines and they wait for this type of market. They love this type of market because they'll be able to go to their friends, colleagues, or other people that are trying to trade assets that are distressed, meaning just distressed. You got to get out of it. Maybe your loan is maturing, right? Over $1 trillion of loans in the multifamily space and the commercial real estate space are maturing between now and the end of next year, right? So this is this little snapshot of what's going to happen. Is all hell going to break loose? Are we all going to be, living on the 7th rung of hell? The answer is no. There's going to be opportunities for people, for investors to make a very healthy, if not obscene amount of money in this space. So I do wish, and I tell clients all the time, you are very poor at communicating your successes. I wish that they were way better because they're it tends to be bad news is the only thing that gets press and communicated out as opposed to good things. And it's not to cover up the bad things. I'm not saying that, but I am saying there needs to be an understanding and an appreciation both at the investor side of, and most investors, this isn't their first time investing, right? So they made returns, and maybe they don't make the return on this particular property that they thought they would make, but they made a bunch of returns on other properties.
Yeah, I think also too maybe the operators do a little bit of a disservice to themselves by always pushing like a 10% cash on cash and 100% total return on an investment, because that's the number they need to hit to be in the sweet spot to get investors, because some of the properties are going to way outperform that.
Sure.
And some of the properties we know are never going to hit those numbers.
Right.
And unfortunately, though, nobody's going to believe the guy that's going to say the property is going to way outperform that, and nobody's going to invest in the guy that says, hey, I'm not going to come anywhere close to that.
Totally agree. I would just say we need to tell operators, and I tell my clients this: be truthful. Always be truthful. It never is going to help you to shade the numbers on your underwriting. Be as rigorous in your underwriting as possible, because some of the best deals that you will ever do are the ones you never do.
Yeah.
So if you walk from a deal that you wanted to because you're like, man, I really want to trade. I haven't traded anything in 2023. I really got to get a property under my belt. My investors are starving for action, right? I've got a whole host of retail investors. They need to invest in something. If they don't invest with me, they're going to go over and invest with somebody else who has another deal. Well, trust your gut. Be conservative. Be rigorous in your underwriting, and be honest.
Yeah. The only real estate I regret buying is the real estate I didn't buy.
That's totally true, right? Totally true. But we've all, if you've lived long enough, and you certainly are in this industry long enough, you'll invest in things that will not perform according to what you wanted them to perform to. You will lose money. Now, is the remedy for that to blame the person that you got into the deal with? No. In my opinion, no. I think there's a personal accountability, and there's just a recognition of human nature, common sense, that we're living in unprecedented times. The interest rate hikes was at an unprecedented level. I'm not sure anyone could have forecasted or foreknew or whatever that process. But the animosity and or lawsuits or litigation is very rarely a solution, in my experience, to long-term joy. Like that does not reveal or result. Even if you win in litigation, you very rarely are joyful about it.
Wait, that's coming from an attorney.
I know.
I mean,
I know.
not litigate? Come on now.
And I litigate, and I am a litigator at my heart. I love to get in there and smack people around, but that's just not. It's not going to result in what you think.
We need to go back and watch some episodes of The Simpsons. It may have been predicted. I don't know.
You never know.
So with the things that are going on with the lenders, the insurance, and all the other crud that we say is the reason we're where we're at today,
right?
Why things are losing money. I am sure, and I don't know, but I'm sure there's a lot of litigation either to the syndicator or from the syndicator, maybe to the lenders or the docs, or what kind of legal action or safety, maybe that's even a better thing, safety for the syndicators to ensure that they're protected and they don't get blacklisted from anybody else out there. I mean, what are some things that people are doing or have done to kind of protect themselves?
So I think first and foremost is understanding your structure, right? So for most operators or syndicators, they don't have personal exposure for the property or their business plan failing. Most of the loans in the multifamily space, at least over the last decade or so, have been non-recourse or qualified non-recourse that are subject to certain carve-outs, meaning intentional bad acts by the syndicator. So unless nothing's going to protect a syndicator who lies, cheats, or steals. Sure. You should be fricasseed on a open fire if that's going to be you. Don't lie, cheat, or steal. But if you have a deal and it fails for whatever reason, and you're thinking about what should I do, and or the lender forces you to sell for nothing more than the loan or something short of the loan, what should you do? Are you going to be sued by your investors? Are you going to be sued by the bank? It is unlikely, let's take the easy one. It's unlikely that the bank is going to sue you, okay? The bank, even if they foreclose, unless you have a high net worth and liquidity or you violated one of those things, that is a loss leader for the bank to sue you. Litigation on average takes 2+ years. And we don't even want to talk about appeals, right? So you can go all the way to jury trial, get your big shiny verdict, and then that goes up on appeal. And then another appeal is like 2 years down the road. It's a massive cost suck out of your pocket and out of the lender's pocket. And the lender, remember, they're business people. They're not in it for spite litigation, sport litigation. They don't have a hate on for the operators to do that unless they lied, cheated, or steal, right, or stole. The investors, that's a totally different dynamic. And when I tell investors, because we represent a lot of investors, we vet deals for investors, or we will advise them, and we're representing certain investors against operators that we don't represent in connection with the lying, the cheating, and the stealing aspect of it. But the reality is the law presumes that a manager or sponsor operator is not responsible for the debts or obligations of the company. So remember, an investor is an investor in a company. The company owns the property. The investor is not an investor in the actual individual sponsor. So the individual sponsor doesn't have a legal, there isn't a legal hook for the investors, theoretically, to sue the individual sponsor. Now, does that mean that the investors are not going to sue potentially a sponsor when they suffer losses? No. I mean, this is America.
Anybody can sue anybody.
Anybody can sue anybody for anything at any time. The real question, though, is will they be successful? And typically what I tell investors is unless you have some facts demonstrating the lying, the cheating, the stealing, you're not going to be successful. Because, one, the law presumes that a manager or the individual sponsor is not responsible. Two, the operating agreement that you signed and that stack of PPM stuff, the risks associated with that, told you that there is a possibility that the investment might fail, which means that you might lose your money associated with that. And that how do you have the right theoretically to win? Not saying not sue, but if you sue, ultimately, hopefully you want to win, right? That's the point of suing, is to win, unless you're going to engage in spite litigation or sport litigation, what I call. But that operating agreement says that the company owes a duty of defense and indemnity, just like an insurance company. They owe that duty to the manager, the sponsors, the operators that are controlling that entity. So think about this. If I'm an investor and I sue a sponsor, and now the company that is taking in the rents, that is struggling along to try to pay its mortgage on time, now is taking in part of that rent to pay for the defense of the very people that I'm suing, right? That's how ironic.
Right.
But you don't. That's the challenge that many investors are faced with. And then just there's a vast amount of case law and precedent that would tell investors your chances of prevailing against a sponsor on a properly disclosed investment is very low. And so I'm a pragmatist at heart. So if the ultimately is we face great sorrow, disappointment, anger, we go through the 7 stages of grief as an investor, and you lose your money, you're going to compound that that period of grief before you get to acceptance by engaging in litigation against sponsors, in my opinion.
And if they want to stay an investor in the space, suing a sponsor is
No.
probably not gonna secure them another investment.
It
in another
won't with
deal.
that particular sponsor, but
Yeah.
you know, there's this period I think is there's something to be said about there's a culling out. There's probably some operators and sponsors that shouldn't be in the space. Yeah. And this period of time will cull that out, right? So it will prevent, or it will gently or not so gently usher those operators into a new chapter of their life to do something different. So
Something they're more suited to do.
something they're more suited to
Would
do.
you like fries with that?
Yeah, that's right. Well, hopefully something that will also provide for their families and their children.
Yeah, so it's a tough time. You know, you have, we're experiencing on some of the stuff we're doing where lenders are tightening up on releasing funds, and we've performed our work,
Totally.
but maybe the property isn't performing for one reason or another, and so they're not releasing the funds to pay for the work that we completed, right? And so, there's no legal action because I think the lenders are probably the most protected class in multifamily, right?
Of course.
So, there's not a whole lot you can do. You're your hands are tied as an operator. You could be a good operator, but things aren't working for one reason or another, as we've explained. So, how do you get around that? How do you get around that as a syndicator or an operator to be able to release the funds of what you intended and all of that? Because if you not foreclose rather, but if we put a lien on that property, well, that's just a tick mark against them, right? Just proving the point.
Well, a lien on a property sometimes can trigger a technical default in connection with their loan covenants. So, my advice for contractors or for anyone in the trades that's actually doing stuff at properties is be careful what you wish for, right? If you file something, you will, that ripple effect associated with what you have done. If your goal is to achieve money in your pocket or payment for the services that you've already provided, that is not necessarily the best option for you. So, what I tell clients that are in the trades or the contractors of a firm, we say, listen, we should try to do a restructure or a workout, because obviously people like yourself that perform a great service to the property and the business plan cannot happen without what you're doing at the property. They cannot charge increased rents. They can't bump their NOI. They can't even keep their NOI static if they're not able to turn their units or rehab their units or repair their property. So that it's a partnership without being formal partners. It's trying to understand what can the property afford, what's the timeline to being able to make all of those invoices, those obligations totally, and getting on a plan or a pathway there. It's not unlike what lenders are dealing with right now from their borrowers who are asking them for loan modifications and or restructuring. So just like the Fed and the FDIC and the joint guidance to the lenders says, hey, work constructively and prudently and effectively with your borrowers, I would encourage all the trades folks to do the exact same thing. Now, it's a totally different situation. You feel you're being jacked around. You feel like it's an unethical, dishonest operator out there that has no intention of paying you back, then ratchet up the pressure. That's your pressure and your leverage is understanding how the loan documents are structured to the point of like, hey, do you want me to trigger a default on a guarantee? So now where, if you don't, or they're going to have to dispute that, and now they're involved in litigation, and that creates a whole new cost suck to them. They don't want that. You don't want that. Nobody wants that. I think the hard thing, though, is thinking creatively for solutions to to a problem, because you have payroll obligations. You have to pound out the light bill just like they have to pound out the light bill. Nobody can work for free.
That's right.
Right? There's a scripture that says a workman is worthy of their hire. So the reality is, those of us that work in this area that we love, we need to get paid for the services that we perform. Sometimes we don't get paid 100% though. Sometimes we don't get paid on the timeline in which we liked or wanted. And so I'm a big believer in active listening as to what your client or your customer actually wants, and trying to try to find the least, crappy solution to the problem, and then just implement it quickly. Make a decision and then implement it.
Yeah, very cool. So, how do you see, and I'm going to say from a legal standpoint, because that's what we're here today.
Yeah.
How do you see things changing, moving forward in this industry? From the legal standpoint.
Yeah.
Are they going to get tighter with restrictions,
Yeah.
or things like that? So, what do you see happening there?
I see a whole host of changes on the horizon. So the Securities and Exchange Commission, our friends in Washington, are typically fairly slow at implementing changes, right? So we've seen some of the recent debacles, like the FTX crypto failures, that shone a light on a lot of problems in the industry dealing with the sale of securities and things like that. And people in the crypto industry kind of thumbing their nose at our friends in Washington, saying these aren't securities. Well, in my opinion, they are securities. So, but irrespective of that, the 5 commissioners are trying their best to say, we're going to try to implement some overhaul, some changes. Because remember, the Securities and Exchange Commission is a wonderful organization that at its core, it's got 3 tenets. One is protecting investors. Awesome. All in. 2 is governance, corporate governance over all of the, like 28,000 individuals, public exchanges, public offerings, registered investment advisors, registered broker-dealers, alternative trading systems, private offerings, all of that. That's a lot. That's a massive amount. But 3, and a lot of people forget about this, is sponsoring capital formation. So they want you to invest. They want people in the private and the public sectors to be successful. And they want retail investors to make money. That's the fuel in the American economy. So they're not there to just rain on your parade. They're there to make sure that you're protecting investors, that you're engaging in proper actions, and they're assisting you with their rules and regulations to actually be successful. So I think there's going to be some amount of change in the regulatory framework that we see. On lending, I think some of the bridge lenders here in the next year and a half are going to have to roll some of these floating rate loans into fixed rate debt, meaning they're going to have to roll out their own product line to the extent that they can. If those loans have not been securitized or sold off onto a secondary market, if they're holding them on their balance sheet and they have the ability to do that, they should do that. They should try to restructure those loans to make it so that their borrowers can hold the properties, continue to operate the properties, and the debt service can be paid on a timely basis. And then I think on the sponsor side, this is going to cull out some people that were using this as a hobby.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a hobby. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. So if you're a syndicator, operator, sponsor, and you're in this and you love this, you love commercial real estate, you love the whole putting the deal together and raising capital and analyzing and underwriting and stabilizing, all of that, awesome. Welcome. This is an amazing industry. You'll be here for a lifetime if you want to be. But if you're dipping your toe in, right, and then you're like, yeah, how's the water here? It's just not. It's just not an industry that you can just kind of half-ass it.
Yeah.
So I think, and I'm not thinking of any specific operators, so don't send me your hate mail. I'm just saying there is a mentality that if this is a hobby, then this may not be for you, and that's okay. That's totally okay. Doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Doesn't mean whatever. I just think that there's regulatory changes on the horizon. There's financial changes on the horizon, and then there's operator changes on the horizon. That's all of that is good for the industry, and all of it is probably necessary given the volatility in the capital markets. It just is.
Yeah, for sure.
So if somebody's out there in the market for a property and they find one, what's the right time for them to call you? When are you getting involved?
Yeah, so depending on how you use us, so a lot of sponsors, operators, syndicators, they'll use us for the whole thing. So we'll handle their basically LOI to the closing table. So all the real estate services we'll do for them, and all of the securities side we'll do for them. So I usually get, we made best and final, right? Where our LOI got accepted and get ready for the first cut of the purchase and sale agreement. That's really up front. If you're going to use us or a securities attorney only for the securities portion of it, you really engage them once you've kicked the tires, once you've done your inspections, once you've got your budgets, once you've got your potential term sheet, once you know what your capital stack's going to look like. Because otherwise, in my opinion, you're wasting potential money, right? You're creating entities, you're starting to spend money, and depending on what your fee structure looks like with securities lawyer, it's potentially money that you'll never get back. So imagine if you hired your securities attorney up here and he started doing work, or she started doing work, and the acceptance of the LOI, well, in the middle of DD, you said, I'm out. Well, what the hell? Now you spent all this money up here for stuff that you're never going to use. Now I get the stress of compressed time frame. If I wait to launch my offering in the middle of DD or at the end of DD, my raise period is shrunk. Well, nobody's saying that you can't talk to people during this first part. Warm those relationships up.
Soft commitments.
Soft commitments. Hey, I just put a property under contract. I'm thinking about doing a private placement memorandum. If I were to do that, is this something that you think that you would want to invest into? And then have conversations about what your business plan might be or what that looks like. I think there's a lot of work that can be done up here by the sponsors without incurring a significant amount of cost. So I'm a big believer in let's try to save you as much money up front, because it's a fairly capital intensive sport, right? Earnest money. Hiring a qualified expert to walk the property to tell them this is what your budget should be for your CapEx. All of that is capital intensive that they have to spend. So you don't want to load on also legal fees that you don't necessarily have to incur. So it just depends on, in the spectrum, how you intend to use your attorney. You can't get through, thankfully, thank the Lord. You can't get through this thing without using attorneys. You always have to use attorneys. They're a necessary evil.
Evil? Is it evil? I mean,
or good,
angel.
depending.
Necessary angel. We'll use that one.
Something. They're necessary through the process. Lenders require them, so you got to have an attorney through the process. But be careful. I would just say be careful. Just remember, when people are working for you, a workman or a workwoman is worthy of their hire. So be prepared to pay something to somebody. Don't just expect, and don't take advantage of people because they're nice, or they're not willing to, or they're willing to let you skate on an invoice or a bill or something like that. I just find that distasteful. Personally, I find that distasteful.
I was going to ask you to take a look at a deal for me, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, I just think that's not acting with high integrity. So I would say all of those things are things to think about when you're thinking about hiring somebody to help you on your deal.
So question I have, when you're going to buy a business or whatnot, you're going to set up its own entity, its LLC. When you're buying a property, or you think this is the route I want to go, I'm going to go a route of a syndicator.
Right.
Do you set up the LLC then, or do you wait till you have the first deal for you to purchase that property under, or I know that every property has its own LLC. I understand that.
Yeah.
But is it the individual's name, or is it an LLC that owns the piece of that LLC that they're purchasing for
Yeah.
the property? I mean, I guess that's what I'm really,
Totally.
how do you get involved? I mean, I'm sure
Totally.
you do all of it. So
There's a lot of what I call business card entities, right? So this is the entity that's going to put this under contract. It might not be the entity that at closing actually closes the deal. A lot of people that get involved in this industry, they don't have an entity. They don't have a limited liability company. They don't have a limited partnership or C Corp or any structure whatsoever. I'm a big believer in doing business through entities because you get tax benefits and there's asset protection that's afforded to you. So you don't have to, though. I was looking at a deal today. It's a $37 million deal. And the letter of intent was just by two individuals. I was like, that's fine. They didn't have an entity, or if they did, they didn't want to put the entity in the purchase and sale agreement. So at some point before closing, that will get assigned from them to an entity. And an entity will be the ultimate borrower. It will be the entity that will either be syndicated or it will be owned by the syndicated entity, in which all the LPs and the GPs and the promote and the fees and all that stuff will be in that structure. But they can wait until the end. If you're looking for, hey, I really want to get in this industry and I really don't have a business card entity, but I really want one and I want to build my brand, and I understand that now the new Yellow Pages is the internet, right? And we want people to be able to Google foo around and find us and all that stuff. Well, you really need a business card entity. So you should probably do that now, because there's ancillary benefits, tax benefits, asset protection benefits, things that are associated up front. And then just think about it from a presentation or sales pitch. If you're trying to distinguish yourself with the commercial real estate brokers out there, and they see a letter of intent from an individual or a letter of intent from like an entity that has a website and there's some sort of substance, it makes it look like, I mean, just me personally, it makes it look like there's a little bit more, I don't know, panache, man, a little bit more
Somebody a little sharper.
substance, right? You want, I mean, something a little bit more, and that might help you. It might set you apart from
Sure.
what you're looking at. I don't know. I mean, that's just anecdotal, but take it for whatever it's worth. I think that there's some merit to that. Even all of those points that lend to get your stuff together right now.
Yeah.
So you said you take it from the beginning until closing, and your job, I know, doesn't stop at the closing table.
No,
You know,
it doesn't.
what happens after closing that you're involved in, and how do you help as their legal advisor moving forward? What does that look like?
Well, so these are obviously they can be large organizations with lots of investors. We're typically not the attorney for any particular member or individual of the deal. We're usually attorneys for the deal, the entity that gets formed, that actually operates and stabilizes the asset. So there's lots of things that pop up during the life of the life cycle of ownership of that asset. Fires, condemnation, having to fire property management companies, liens, mechanics liens, investors wanting to change the classification of their shares from themselves to whatever. There might even be suits or claims or lawsuits or things like that that might even be covered by insurance. So our firm acts as outside general counsel for a lot of those operators as they operate those things. Most people didn't go to law school to figure out how to read an insurance contract, or what happens if you've got a worker who gets hurt. Is that covered by workers' comp, or is that covered by, do I have to pay for that? Or there's a slip and fall, or there's a potential shooting. Now I'm being sued for premises liability for a violent crime that occurred on my property. What do I do? How's that covered by insurance, or is it covered by insurance? Those types of things pop up, as you might imagine, a lot.
Yeah.
And we try to be a sounding board for clients and a mechanism to be able to usher them to give opinions on what they should do next, so that they don't feel overwhelmed and unable to make a decision, right? Because these are businesses. They're really like businesses. So we help them in the area in which legal advice is helpful for them to be able to run an efficient and streamlined business.
Perfect.
Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to share or talk about?
No, man. I'm happy to be here. I love this table, by the way.
Yeah,
This
thank
is
you.
a
Thank you.
killer table.
I made it.
You did?
No, a friend of mine made it.
Oh, okay, all
He
right.
did a
See,
great
that
job.
was a part of the lying, cheating, and stealing.
Oh, there
It was
you
right
go.
over here.
There. So
All right,
good
ladies
To be
and
fair,
gentlemen.
though, I did used to do construction, so I
Okay, all right.
I do know how to build things.
You had an
I didn't build
idea
things.
of what went into the
That's
making
it.
of this
Yeah.
beautiful
That
table.
is it.
Well, hey, we really appreciate you coming in
Thank
and
you.
sharing with us and,
Yeah.
and spending your time with us.
Love it.
Yeah.
Glad to
And,
be here, guys. I'm rooting for your success.
As we
Praying
are
for our
you.
praying for our entire industry. If you're a sponsor operator out there and you feel like you're struggling, just know you're not alone. There's lots of people all around the country that are in the same exact position that you are. Don't let paralysis by analysis, or we talked about fear, don't let that be your guiding, lighthouse for making decisions on what that is. Get yourself surrounded by a team to help you work through whatever you're going through. So, take that for whatever it's worth. A little pithy,
Yeah.
little bit of pithy wisdom at the end.
We
All right.
appreciate it. Thank you
Yeah.
so
All right.
much. for
Thank
being
you.
here.
All right, fellas.